there's poverty, there's child abuse, and of course colonisation. Those are the three issues that we really have to face in our country if we're going to make changes. I call this a blueprint to change the way we look after children in this country. And if we don't take it up as a nation, then we don't deserve to be called a nation.
This is Down to Earth Conversations, where we hear from ordinary people who are helping to bring a bit of heaven down to earth. Kia ora, welcome to another episode of Down to Earth Conversations with me, your host, Andy Dixon. Today I've released an episode out of my usual rhythm because today is a significant day in Aotearoa New Zealand. Today the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse in State and Faith-Based Care released their final report. This report, which took 6 years to compile, details the abuse of thousands of New Zealand children and other vulnerable people while in the care of the state or faith-based organisations. The report estimates that between 1950 and 1999, over 200,000 people suffered abuse while in the care of these organisations. Today's guest, Ken Clearwater, is himself a survivor of sexual abuse and has been made an officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit for his 30 years of supporting other male survivors of abuse and advocating for legislative change. He was one of those who regularly called for the government to launch a Royal Commission of Inquiry, and we talk both about Ken's own journey and the inquiry itself. I want to make it very clear up front that while I'm Anglican, I do not speak on this podcast on behalf of the Anglican Church, or even the Church in general. There will be responses from various churches in the coming days and weeks, and my role here is simply to cordial with Ken, hear his perspectives, and present them to you in order that you'd consider your own feelings and responses to what I want to say is a very clear manifestation of evil in our country. I'm a Christian, and it is devastating to me that so many have been harmed in our churches when they were supposed to be cared for and be shown love, joy, and peace. We recorded this at All Souls Anglican Church in Mayorvale, Christchurch, and as you will hear in the conversation, it's a big deal for Ken to be inside a church, given what he's seen of the dark side of religious institutions. Obviously, there are things in this conversation that may be challenging to listen to, including mention of rape, sexual assault, and suicide. Please take care of yourself and stop listening or take breaks if you need to. Please use your own support structures or make use of the links in the show notes to seek help if you need it. While there are some hard truths in this episode, it is ultimately an episode of hope. It is a conversation with a man who has grown something powerful from the evils he was put through. It is the story of how men have supported other men and how goodness can thrive even in the face of great evil. This is episode 96 of Down to Earth Conversations. Here's Ken Clearwater. It's a privilege to be here with you, Ken. Kia ora, Ken. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And for those who don't know you, can you just share a little bit about who you are and what is it that you do?
Ken Clearwater. I work with and support male victims of sexual trauma. I've been doing it since 1994. Started off in a voluntary base and then became the manager of Male Survivors of Sexual Abuse Trust in Christchurch in 2001. And so the last 30 years basically working with and supporting male victims of sexual trauma.
Yeah, which, signals that this could be a bit of a heavy conversation for some listeners. And so as you're listening, please do take care of yourself. And I'll have support links in the show notes so that you can find support if you need it. Life changed for you significantly at the age of 12. Before that, as a kid growing up in New Zealand, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I didn't have any ambitions at that time. I was one of those happy-go-lucky kids just out doing stuff and enjoying life, and even going to the Methodist Church in Papanui on every Sunday, and things like that, and just loved the Sunday school and things like that. So I was just a normal everyday kid. Went to Cubs at the Methodist Cubs and did all those normal normal sorts of things. And so life was pretty good. Mum, dad, and there were 7 kids. So
Wow.
we didn't. I look back, and I'm pretty spoiled when I look at that. But we didn't think we were, because we didn't have all the extras that other kids had.
Yeah.
Mum and dad struggled. They both worked, but we were clothed and we were fed, and we went to school. So so life was pretty normal.
Where were you in the pecking order of children?
I'm the middle child, so a lot, people say that might be why I do the attention-seeking stuff, but I like to disagree with that. I think.
Yeah. Nice. You've shared your story publicly quite a bit, and particularly there's a TED Talk that people can go and hear a lot of your story. So we're not going to dive deeply into it, but I will put a link for people that want to go and hear a bit more about that. But life did change for you at 12 when you were raped, and that even hurts to say. I can't even imagine going through that. I've heard you talk about how survivors of rape and sexual assault carry this shame and guilt with them that isn't actually theirs to carry, but it happens. How did that manifest for you after that experience?
Well, I suppose it's that I don't think the patriarchal system helped at all, because as a young fella, you're growing up and you're supposed to be tough and strong and don't talk, and definitely don't talk, you're not allowed to tell stories and things like that, so you're shut down in that era. And of course, so to be I had, at 12 years old, I suddenly learnt that if I'm going to survive in this world, I've got to be tough and staunch. Wow. And so I become an angry child, an angry boy, violence, and I remember I found alcohol at that age, and that helped numb some of the pain and stuff like that. So I went from that happy-go-lucky little kid to a very violent child. In the classroom, there was always jokes and that sort of thing, but then after the abuse, it became quite angry and violent. And also sitting there looking out the window, living in a different world. My education basically stopped at 12.
Wow. And I mean, I'm the board chair of a primary school, so I see kids coming through, and there's so many kids that society would label problem children.
Yeah.
And yet, I think most of the, quote, problem children that I've experienced have been hurting children. And that definitely sounds like your experience.
Oh, exactly. And I say now, and I look at schools, I look at anywhere, even what government are doing at the moment with this OT stuff, with the boot camps, it's not going to work. No. You can't punish trauma. Yeah. You need to sit down with those guys, and we can be angry. I mean, I'd be angry if I owned a shop and a bunch of kids drove their car into it. But why would kids be doing that today? A, because they've got nothing else to do. There's no strong male, healthy male role models in their lives, so they're living it out with their mates and stuff like that. And what can be more great than it's going to sound silly, but the exhilaration of driving a car into a building and then stealing everything, and your mates are filming it, and you all of a sudden you're a hero, so you've found a place in life. Yeah. And that's what these kids are looking for, a place on our planet Earth here, really, and they're fitting with those. The gangs, of course, we know, and the Royal Commission will prove that the gangs came out of the boys' homes in the 50s and 60s. So those kids were looking for someone who they could relate to, and you relate to your mates, and the next minute you've got a patch on and you're important. You don't have the silver fern on your chest, but you've got a patch. You belong to something. And I think that's what we're all looking for, is a place of belonging.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's too easy to look at something that we're not familiar with and criticise, because it's not how our life has gone or how we've done it. Yeah. So you look at the gangs, you look at these kids doing the ram raids and go, what's their problem? They just need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps.
Or kick up the bum and stuff like that.
I mean, a lot of it even just comes out of poverty and, the way that society's stacked against people that don't have much.
And I think to me there's poverty, there's child abuse, and of course colonisation. Yeah. Those are the three issues that we really have to face in our country if we're going to make changes. And the Dunedin study has said that all our issues come out of poverty, and people know that, but unfortunately it doesn't fit in the political cycle. They'll talk about poverty and they're going to clean up poverty, but they don't actually do anything to clean it up.
And in some cases, they do things that make it worse. And then wonder why we've got lots of social issues.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, it's something that's come up time and time again on this podcast, of talking to people who are out there doing good in the world and working with people who are struggling. And it's not even a left and right issue.
No, it's not.
It's both.
Yeah.
Government after government after government just misses the boat.
Yeah. Well, they've got to spend their 3 years staying in power, and then they've got to spend their political portfolios ensure they get back into power. And so, and children. We talk about children being our tonga, children being our future, but it's not how we operate at all. Children just seem to be a pain, and
and a political football.
Yeah.
Getting back to your journey, you got to a point as an adult where you said that you felt that you were a danger to society and to yourself, and you decided to ask for help. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience of asking for help was like?
Oh, it was because I contemplated suicide, and I just really, I started to believe everything that I'd been told, that I was useless, hopeless, psychopath, and all that sort of stuff, dangerous to myself and others. And so I looked at taking my own life, and it was my daughters who knocked on my bedroom door, and I had to get them ready for school. And I realised then that I needed him. We're talking 1991. And just in my head I was going, where does a man ask for help? Where does a man go and get help? And I couldn't think of anywhere at that time, because men just didn't ask for help. Yeah. And then I thought, oh, hold on, we've got Sunnyside, which is now called Hillmorton, and I knew that was the biggest mental health institution in New Zealand at that time. So I thought I'll go out there. And that's where I went. I went out and I basically said, last night I threatened to kill a man over a game of pool. Today I'm contemplating taking my own life. And they just looked at me. There were 4 people, and they said, we can't help you. And I ended up going to a whole lot of different departments at Sunnyside. And it wasn't until a woman, and it was like a construction office. So there must have been a bit of stuff going on. And I don't even remember telling her the story. And she just looked at me and said, you need help, mate. And I said, thank you. She said, you won't get it here. And I said, well, where do I go? Wow. And she said, would you go to psych emergency? And I said, yes. And then I had to ask her what psych emergency was. But she'd offered me something. Yeah. And I knew the reason I didn't leave after they said they couldn't help me, I knew if I didn't get help that very, very moment, I didn't know what was going to happen to me or my children. So I wasn't going to give up, and I just and I ended up at psych emergency at the Canterbury Public Hospital in town, and was able to get a psychologist who was really understanding of my anger, my violence, but admitted that he couldn't handle or deal with, he wasn't trained in working with the sexual abuse. So he put me onto a counsellor.
Right. And so, just to make it really obvious, where you'd got to in life at that point has a direct link back to what happened to you as a child.
Oh, without a doubt. And I couldn't even, all those years, I couldn't connect them together. I just knew that there was something wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was. And I could never work out that it was actually the sexual violation committed on me at that time.
That sounds to me like a story that would be repeated over and over again in this country. And around the world. But that there are people who have faced trauma, who have some really troubling issues, but who don't know where it's come from, who haven't got the help, who are too scared to ask for help, and when they have asked for help, it's been a struggle. And I think, I don't know, what's your experience? It seems like we're getting a little bit better at being able to talk about it, but has that actually turned into real action in terms of providing a space to ask for help.
It's getting a wee bit better, and we are talking about it a little more, but there's still a huge lack of support out there when you do. I mean, if you rang me up today and said you had some issues, I would have to say, well, I can see you one-on-one, but you'll have to wait 6 to 8 months before I can get you a counsellor. So those services aren't available.
Wow.
And we go back to that male, and it's just as hard for women and girls as it is for men and women, but men and guys, but boys. But you've got to remember, we live in that patriarchal society once again, where we're tough and staunch, and you can't talk about this stuff. So we're held back in a lot of ways. And for me, like even talking today, I know how difficult it is for people to listen to someone talking about sexual trauma. So you imagine how it is for that person who has the sexual trauma. So for me, it's about how do we make the conversation normal, not the act of what happened, but being able to talk about it, because I know that I used to get shut down. Oh, we don't want to hear, or don't talk about that here, you'll upset that person over there, and things like that. So it's how do we make that conversation normal for our children, so that our children can say, Mum, Dad, or whoever it is, these things are happening to me and I don't like them. Whereas every single guy that I've worked with, and especially if it was within the Catholic Church at that time, if they told their parents, they got a beating for telling their parents what this wonderful, caring priest had done to them. So that was hard. And so they, then they're isolated from their spiritual beliefs and things like that. So that's a whole nother trauma for those guys.
Yeah. The man that I'm sitting and talking with today doesn't appear to me to be a danger to himself or society. What changed for you? Like what came along that allowed you to become?
It was getting that help. And the first counsellor I went to, I've got to admit, was just not the right person to see. And then for me, what saved me was when I was opening the press one day, and it would have been about 94, and they had a community board section, and I'm going, and I always had a look to see what's going on in the community. And next minute I see this thing, are you a male and were you sexually abused in childhood? And I looked at it and I saw it, and I went to the next thing. Then I went back to it, and I thought, surely that's not in black and white. Back in 90, and it was. So I rang the number, and it said ring Andrew. So I rang the number, and a woman answered the phone. I was just going to hang up, and she had a really lovely voice, and she said, oh, are you ringing about the advert in the paper? And I said, I am. And she told me where the meeting was and things like that. So I ended up, and I met there were 30 guys in this room, a mixture. There were gang members, there was truck drivers, there was businessmen, a mixture of people, Māori, Pākehā, Samoan, sitting around in a circle talking about what happened to them in their childhood. And it literally blew me out of the water. And I thought, shit, I've found my place. And so that was it. I've been in that place ever since.
Yeah. So having found that place for your own journey of healing, what made you then go, I want to do this. I want to be part of this.
Well, we're just
helping other guys.
Well, and there was a guy in the group, and he never spoke. Lovely guy, and he never spoke. And he just sat there. And then afterwards, one day, I just says, "Oh, David was his name, David Pettit." And I says, "What do you do, David?" He said, "I'm a counsellor." I said, "Oh," I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm here to support Ian, who's doing this. It's a peer support group." But he said, if anyone gets triggered or anything goes down, I'm there to help them. But he said, eventually I want to step away so that the survivors take over, but I will always be there to help them. And then one day I just went up to him and said, "Oh, David," I said, "I think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life." I said, "Can we sit down and have a chat?" And he says, "Oh, no," he said, "that wouldn't work." And of course, a survivor getting told no, you go into that I'm worthless, useless. And I went into all that, why doesn't he want to sit with me? Am I not worth it? And he could see that I was taken back. And he said, no, he said, "We've got a kind of relationship within this group." He said, "What I'd like you to do," he says, "I know a clinical psychologist who I think would be the person for you to talk to about this, and that doesn't interfere with the relationship that we've got here." And it took a wee while for that to sink in. And he gave me the name of a clinical psychologist, a man called Martin Visser. And he said to me now, he says, "Ken," he said, "this may or not may or may not work for you. He said, you'll know whether you can have a relationship with this guy, because if you can't have a relationship, you're not going to heal.
Yeah.
And he said, and he will explain to you that if you don't think he's the right person, you can. So he took me through all that, and so I didn't realise that I'm learning from him as I'm going along. Went and saw Martin, walked in, looked at him. Lovely Anglican man, but I didn't know that at the time. And I looked, you're a school kid. He looked so young, so he saved my life. He knew what he was doing, and he put me on the right track. And at that time, ACC were offering 10 counselling sessions, but you had to pay a top up on those counts. But I was. As wrong as that was, I was happy to pay it to get myself on the right track. And yes, I've never looked back.
And so you've been doing these support groups and working with men who are survivors for how long now?
30 years. Yeah, 30 years this year.
What is it about a room of men sharing with one another that offers a space of healing?
It's real. You're not judged. There's no shame. There's no guilt. You hear another man's story and you think, holy mackerel, yep, no, I know what that's like. And even though we're all different in what happens to us in our environments that we grow up in and things like that, the effects are the same. So it's looking at saying, Bill might say, this is what's happened this week, and I got really triggered, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And you can say, well, this is what I do. This is what helped me. And so that gives Bill an opportunity to have a look. Oh, yeah, okay, I'll give that. But it might not work for him. So when you've got 10, 15 guys from different backgrounds talking about what gets them through that week, because that's what it's about. How did your week go, and did you get triggered, and how did you deal with it? So when you're listening to another man who you trust, you've got a relationship with, he's not going to go out into the world and say these things about you and stuff like that. So it's massive. It's absolutely massive, and it's like sitting around the old fire after killing the mammoth and talking bloke stuff.
Yeah, I think as someone who's worked in a church and done pastoral care, there are times where someone's come in and they've talked to me about an issue they've got, and I've listened, and then we've got to the end of the session and they've gone, oh, thank you, that was like so helpful. And I feel like I've done nothing. I feel like I've just listened.
Yeah, and that's it. That's all you need to do.
And and that, like, there's a power in providing a space for people to share, isn't there?
Yeah. And you think, most of these guys, some of them had been holding it for 30 or 40 years, never told you. Some of them never told their parents, their partners, their girlfriends. Wow. And you're the first person that they're sharing it with. So it's pretty massive. And you've got to respect and honour that. And so that gives, people say men don't talk, but you give them a safe space. We can't shut our guys up. We've got to have a timer, And,
yeah, nice. Something that's come up a lot on this podcast has been the criminal justice system and also the mental health system, and sort of the failings of both in a large number of areas. Those both collide dramatically with the work that you do. Can you speak a little bit about how the connection is with survival of sexual trauma and the prison and mental health systems?
Yeah, well, they're all a mess. They all need to be thrown out and rejigged. I started working in the prison in '98. This guy wrote to me, and I went out and met with him, and that's when I started the work in the prison, and then realised that a lot of other guys that I was working with started disclosing they'd been in prison, been in the boys' homes, been in the orphanages, and then straight through there into prison. And so I saw that link and tried to work out what that link was, and it was the fact that there wasn't the help for them. The mental health system, look, it's the people within it, and this is not putting them down. There's some people in there trying their best. It's a broken system, and it's never worked, and it's never going to, and especially for victims of sexual trauma. You're not allowed to bring that up if you go in there with and things like that, because they'll tell you not to talk about it. You need to sort out why you're in here first. Well, I'm in here because of the, and so there's a lot of training that has to be done within the mental mental health system, within the prison system, and they're not trained to do this sort of work. And I think you hit on it before. What's the most valuable thing you can do to someone who discloses? Listen. You don't have to give them advice. You can acknowledge that you've heard them. Is there anything I can do to help you, instead of, oh, you should do that, or you should do, so it's a gentle way of doing it, but to be able to just talk to someone else, it's so powerful, and it doesn't cost anything.
I think one of the stats I read when I was researching for this was that something like 65% of men in prison have been sexually abused. That's huge.
Yeah, and we believe it's higher than that.
Right.
The Royal Commission in Australia, before our Royal Commission did it, with they researched 27 penal institutions in Australia, and it came up with 65% of male and females in prison. When you look at, I remember there were some studies done here many years ago at Christchurch Women's Prison, and I think 85 to 90% of women in women's prisons had suffered sexual abuse. If you look at the mental health system, out of the DSAC conference in 1995 came that 62% of men who'd been through the mental health system had been sexually violated in childhood. If you look at schizophrenia and all those diagnoses, 85%, and so sexual trauma, it's a pandemic, but we don't, for some reason, we can't look on it like that. It's like it's that, oh no, it might go away.
It's head in the sand stuff.
Yeah, very head in the sand. Yeah.
And as long as we can't talk about it openly, it's going to stay like that.
Yeah. And like I approached every school in Canterbury at Lincoln and about a few years ago to get into schools to talk about this stuff. Could not get into one. Wow. Ended up at Shirley Boys, only through Rod Hayes, who was a counsellor there. He was a former New Zealand squash champion. And he says to me one day, do you go to schools? I said, I'm not allowed in. So he got me in there, and then I met Penny Burrows from Rangiora, and she got me into her, I think 4 days I was in there, and it was massive. And, and it was good to be able to talk about it, and it was good to get the feedback from the young boys and things like that. So why are we afraid to talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess it's uncomfortable. It's been taboo for a long time.
Yeah. So how's that for the child?
Yeah.
Or the person that's been raped and traumatised? If we can't listen to it, how are they supposed to be able to tell us? And so it is. It's about, and like I said earlier on, it's about normalising this conversation and not the act.
You've been involved as well as supporting men. You've been involved in pushing for political change and social change around these kind of issues. At what point did you go, I need to do more than just help these guys? I need to actually hit this at a national level, at a governmental level?
Well, I knew early on, and Ian, who started Male Survivors, Ian Bennett, back in 91, he started the first support group and set up the trust in 97. And when I was sitting in there, I had a conversation with Ian, and I said, we need to expand. We need to talk to politicians. And Ian didn't want to do that, and I totally understand why. Is because he was frightened that of what might come out of it, and we'd get shut down and all those sorts of things. Yep. But I knew that the only way we were going to make any changes was political. And like everybody else, not a fan on politicians, but and also learnt very quickly that you had to work with all politicians. I come out of the womb, lived in Papanui, working class area with Labour tattooed on my forehead, but really soon learnt that I had to talk to all politicians. And one of the funny things I found out is they're human beings.
Yeah.
Some of them, their ideas are pretty weird, but some of them are caring. But I do wonder that once they do get into the position of power, takes over, and so common sense goes out the door.
Yeah, there's pressures on them to juggle with what's actually their own perspectives with towing party lines and campaigning. Yeah.
I wouldn't survive in there.
No, not.
But there was no training. in this country to do this work. Even now, if you're a counsellor, a psychologist, psychiatrist, social worker, you won't get trained specifically in working with sexual trauma, and you won't get trained in working with male victims. So I ended up going overseas. And meeting up with like-minded people, ended up in speaking at the United Nations on sexual trauma and displacement because of the peer support work we were doing here in New Zealand, and so that was pretty powerful, making those connections. And we held a conference here at ARA in 2017, and we had 15 international speakers who are experts in this field, all survivors and all had gone on, like Jim Clemente. I don't know if you've ever seen Criminal Minds. He was a writer-producer, former FBI agent. He came out and spoke about his journey and becoming a special FBI agent within child abuse units and stuff like that. So that's where I started meeting with other like-minded people and getting the knowledge and experience that I needed to do this work.
I find it fascinating that on the one hand, you're getting opportunities to speak at the UN. You're meeting these people. You've been made a officer of the New Zealand Order of Merit. You've got all these avenues of recognition in some ways that this is really important work. And on the other hand, let's not talk about it.
Yeah, I'm not classified as an expert because I don't have I don't wear the tweed jacket, the bow tie, and have a psychological so those sorts of things. So I'm definitely not seen as an expert in this field.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't fit I call it the colonisation Westminster tick box system, which we have in this country. So I don't fit that tick box. I'm just someone who's got lived experience, and that's just unfortunately not good enough.
It's I don't know, that whole thing blows my mind of going, wow, what important work, and don't talk about it unless we'll talk about it like when you're getting recognised, but then don't talk about it. But around the political stuff, you have seen some changes over the years.
Yes, slowly. We've still got a long way to go. I remember in 1998 we sent out we were so proud. We had a pamphlet. I look back at it now and you have a wee giggle. And the guy who set the pamphlet up, he'd been horrendously abused by his mum over a period from 4 years old to 12, and he wrote in it that you can get ACC counselling and there's no it's not gender specific, and we got a letter back from ACC saying that we had to remove that from the pamphlet because if a boy or a person had been sexually violated by a female perpetrator, they weren't entitled to ACC counselling because ACC is a legislative act, and there's nothing in there that says that women sexually violate boys, and so wow. So that was difficult. So we managed to get that changed, but that took a couple of years. Fortunately, we were able to get the counselling that people needed, but it took a long time to change the act. So you imagine young fella being abused by a female perpetrator, but you can't get help for that. And then you look at what help is out there for that female perpetrator as well, and so that was our first movement into the political field, and and that was good to suddenly see that we can make a difference by speaking out.
Yeah, that highlights again what a patriarchal society we live in. That we think we're living in this society of equality, and most women I know would tell you we're not.
No,
quite clearly.
Yeah.
But we like to think we are.
Yeah.
And yet we've got these archaic things set up in our society where we assume that a perpetrator is male, and we assume that that a woman can't hurt a boy in that kind of way. Yeah. And so great that change got made.
Yes, but still not talked about.
Yeah. And like you say, still lots more work to do.
Yeah.
One of the things that you did push for with the government over successive governments for 20 years was to get a royal commission to look into abuse in both state and religious care, and that is happening.
Yeah.
What did it feel like when you got the word that this commission of inquiry was going to happen?
Oh, look, it was amazing, and because in fact last night I just reread all the denial letters I got from Helen Clark and
Wow.
John Key and nearly all the politicians in both parties. What I didn't realise, and this is the thing about the work we do, we're in isolation. And so what I didn't realise, there was actually other people doing this as well, pushing for the Royal Commission. So, and I had no idea. And that was those that had been in state care and faith-based care and stuff like that. So I finally got to meet up with those people. So had we been together a lot sooner, we could maybe have. But it was Jacinda Ardern who had the courage to do it and have it. And will it make a difference? I hope so. What worries me is the people that should be reading it won't read it because it's in the, la, we don't need to hear about this stuff. So for me, it's not about just the politicians, it's about the people in New Zealand. And we have to, if we're going to make changes, we need the people in New Zealand to stand up beside us and say, hey, if those are the recommendations, they've got to be made, and they've got to talk to their politicians. They've got to stand beside us and write to their politicians and support the work we're doing. Otherwise, there may not be any changes.
Yeah, which would be heartbreaking.
That would be a criminal offence.
There is so much devastation that's been poured into this. So many people that have been so vulnerable. 6 years, is it? Something like that?
Yes, 2018 it started.
Yeah.
And it was only supposed to be for 4 years. I suppose, and that's the funny part for me, is you hear all the people at the top saying, we didn't know it was going to be this big. We knew it was going to be this big, but once again, we're on the coalface. We know what we're doing. We know what we're doing, but we aren't the experts. But once the experts get hold of it, we didn't know how big it was going to be. Well, it's big, and it still hasn't covered everything that it should cover.
Yeah. As we sit here today, it's 2 days from being released.
Yep.
What are your feelings at the moment?
Oh, look, I'm. It sounds weird, but I'm excited. This is. Like it's 20 years for this, but it's 30 years of my work, and then it's 50 to 60 years of those who are victims of, who will finally have something that I call this a blueprint to change the way we look after children in this country. And if we don't take it up as a nation, then we don't deserve to be called a nation. And fingers are crossed that it's going to make a difference, that the right people are going to do the right things. And once again, we can't do that without the support of the public.
Yeah. This is an inquiry into both abuse that happened in state care and abuse that happened in religious organisations and places where people should have been safe. You have experience in working with people, that particularly in that coming out of that religious space. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've experienced as you've worked with those people? What have you seen in terms of the response from the church over the years?
I can't put this politely. They've lied to me. I met with, and I won't say who the bishop was because he's no longer with us and he can't speak, but I met with him in 1996, I think it was, when I could see this was going to blow up in a big way. And I met with him and he says that, Ken, his words were, you don't have to worry, we've only had 2 complaints against the Catholic Church here in Christchurch. And I left there a bit bewildered, really, and I wondered whether, did he believe that? And if he believed it, then he knows it's not true. And so I struggle with that, how people who stand up in the pulpit on a Sunday preaching sins and preaching hell and fire and damnation and all that can then blatantly lie about something that's happening within their organisation. I struggle with the Vatican for the simple reason that they've got thousands and thousands and thousands of archives and secret documents of child abuse there. The Anglican Church, of course, has been very similar, and I've been very fortunate to meet some incredible, amazing, brave women who 30 years ago stood up against the Anglican Church, and they're still fighting to this day. So that saddens me. The good thing is that I'm sitting here. I never thought that I would be sitting in a church again, because of that. I feel safe here. I feel comfortable here, and that's because of the work that I've seen that Megan and those other women are doing. So that's where I see the hope. And once again, it comes to the people who work through the door of the church. They've got to hold the hierarchy responsible. And how do you do that when, like the patriarchal hierarchy system has been more powerful than you as a mere mortal walking through the doors? And I think that once again, that will be the changes will be made by those who will walk through the doors. And I look forward to seeing those changes.
Yeah. I mean, I have to be careful here because I'm speaking on this podcast as Andy, the podcaster.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking on behalf of the church.
No.
I'm not. The churches, the Anglican, the Catholics, all of the main churches will have their own responses in the coming days. My heart here is not to, I guess, stand up as a person and say this is what the church should do, but to just acknowledge that churches, I'm a Christian and Christians have got it wrong. That there has been hurt, there has been pain. And then that hurt and pain, as we will see when the report comes out, has been made worse by the way that it's been dealt with, both in faith institutions and in state.
Hugely.
That the denial, the cover-ups, the way that it's been dealt with over the years has been, I want to say, evil. That it's been horrific. And like I say, this is me with my own personal opinion.
Yeah.
But it hurts me as someone who's in the church that we follow someone who calls to love and calls to care for the most marginalised in our society, and we have failed. And yet I look at people like yourself who have had the courage to stand up in the midst of that and go, I'm going to do something about that. And that there are people within the church doing that as well. That gives me hope.
And it is hard to speak out against something that you believe strongly in as well when you're in part of that. And I remember when Peter Burke came out, he was the head of the St. John of God order, and he was just the most amazing man that you could possibly meet. He met with the survivors, he spoke with the survivors, he told them what he wanted to do for them, and then he was ordered back to the Vatican and told to stop doing what he was doing. So that was really sad.
What would be your advice for listeners who engage with this report, who hear the stuff that's going on in the media, because it'll be in the media for a while, before we move on to something else and forget about it, which I hope doesn't happen, but that's the cycle. What is your advice to listeners who hear this stuff and go, this is awful, what can I do?
Well, like I said before, is talk to your MP, talk to your church, talk to somebody, look at how you can help, what can you do to contribute to help others that are working in this field and things like that, but to really do it with your heart. And it is about us as human beings caring for other human beings. Let's get back to that, and how can you do it as an individual? What can you do? Can you donate to the church if they're setting up counselling services? Can you support a person? Look at what you can do individually, and or even as a co-op, get together and think, what can we do to make this different? How can we help those children? How can we help those people that have been hurt? And I think that's something that people can look at.
Yeah. When you look at the inquiry and the report that's coming out, and you think about potential change that could happen, what's top of the list for you on your hopes for where to from here?
Well, the first thing is, the government have to look at the recommendations, then they have to look at how do they implement those recommendations, and what do they need to implement those recommendations, and that means about using the survivor network that's come together, and because those are the experts in this field. The government don't have experts in this field. The survivor network has the experts in this field. So we need to sit down with the government officials, with the survivor, who had the survivor experience, and look at those recommendations together, not in isolation. And I liken it a wee bit to like next Monday I'm going to be to Parliament in relation to the change of the Oranga Tamariki Act, the Section 7AA. So they've made a decision what they're going to do about Section 7AA, and then they're putting it out for consultation. Why aren't we sitting at the table before they make those changes? Because they've already made up their mind what they're going to do, but they put it out for consultation. So, well, we consulted the community. We haven't listened to the community, but we've consulted them. And this would concern me about the Royal Commission. If the government thinks that they can take those recommendations and do something with them in isolation, then nothing's going to change. So they need to be sitting down with the survivor community and having a look at what can we do.
It needs to be relational, doesn't it?
Oh, exactly, yeah. And it needs to be a genuine partnership, which is something that New Zealand governments since 1840 have not been very good at doing partnerships.
Understatement. Yes. It's been very difficult, shall we say.
Well, we talk about the power and control dynamics, and that's how sexual abuse is allowed to continue, because of those power and control dynamics. And so we need to look at a different way of doing things.
Yeah. What brings you hope?
The opportunity to talk like this now, to be on the radio this morning, to have been interviewed on different, that gives me hope that people are listening to what we're talking about. And there will be lots of survivors, lots of agents who will get to talk over the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and so that sort of thing. So that gives me the hope. Do I think that I hope there's going to be changes? I really do, and like I said, it's up to us as a survivor community and the community and the politicians to sit down, and I just can't see this being ignored. But that doesn't mean it won't be. So that's it. So we just keep battling and keep doing what we do in the hope that the right people are listening and the right people do something about it, and and live with that hope.
Yeah. Where to here for you? What's next steps for Ken Clearwater?
Well, I did try to retire 3 years ago. That didn't work out very good at all. So I will just keep doing the work that I'm doing, because it's not even a job. I mean, I love doing what I'm doing. As horrible as what it is, to get a call like a guy this morning rang because he's heard the thing on the news this morning. He rang me from Taranaki and said, he needed someone to talk to, and I spoke to him, and he was just so grateful that I actually answered the phone. So that's a buzz, knowing that someone can just ring up and chat to you and do it. So that I'll keep doing that probably until whatever happens when I fall off this mortal coil. I'll just keep doing what I do, and I'm lucky to have a great support team around me. My family are amazing. The people I've worked with over the years are always there if I need them, and so I'm pretty spoiled.
Awesome. So, thank you so much for giving time today, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for all those years ago choosing to be vulnerable and sharing your story, and then journeying with all these other men that I know you've made a difference in the lives of so many, and I can't you can't underestimate how much impact that's had on those lives. So thank you for that. Thank you for what you're doing to bring a bit of heaven down to earth.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Kia ora.
Hello, hello heaven. Will I hear you whisper to come near?
I have so much respect for Ken. Through his work in this area, he has helped men learn to give and receive love in the face of all that has harmed them, and all that could lead them to trust no one and share nothing. Through his own vulnerability, Ken has broken down walls, impacting thousands of lives, and he continues to find life in the connections he makes and the healing that he sees. So Ken, thank you for who you are and for what you do. Here is a blessing for you. Ken, may you forever know your great worth, not because of what you do, but simply because you are you, worthy of life and love. May you continue to be filled with life as you journey with men and see them making steps, no matter how small, towards spaces of healing and wellness. May all those you encounter know that they too are worthy of life and love, as you gift them with the deep love that you have for the wounded, the hurting, the vulnerable. May they also know that they can do more than survive, that they too can thrive. May you see the fulfillments of your hopes around the Royal Commission's report, seeing real and long-lasting changes being made by those with the power to do so. May those who need to stand up to ensure that those in care are indeed cared for, and that our structures and systems do not allow these evils to continue unchecked. As you look back, may you feel proud of the work you have done and receive strength for the work yet to do. And lastly, may you know you are seen, you are heard, and you are loved. Thanks to Strawn for the music and Rangi for the karakia. As we reach the end of this episode, I would encourage us all to take the time to get familiar with the recommendations of this report and then hold those in power to account to ensure the recommendations are acted on in government and in our churches. I finish this episode as I finish all my episodes with karakia, but somehow I feel the need for it today more than ever. Me inoi tātou.
E tō mātou matua I te rangi, kia tapu tō ingoa, kia tau mai tō rangatiratanga, kia mea te tau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua, kia rite anō ki tō te rangi. Homai kia mātou ai nei, he taro mā mātou mō tēnei rā. Muro o mātou hara, me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga, e hara ana kia mātou. Aua hoki mātou e kawea, kia whakawaia, engari whakaorangi a mātou I te kino.